Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur Michel. Ich begrüße Sie alle ganz herzlich zur 12. Europarede, die die Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung zusammen mit der Stiftung Mercator und der Stiftung Zukunft Berlin veranstaltet. Ich bedanke mich sowohl bei der Mercator-Stiftung wie bei der Stiftung Zukunft Berlin für die seit Jahren bewährte gute Zusammenarbeit und begrüße für die beiden Stiftungen Volker Hassemer als Vorsitzender der Stiftung Zukunft Berlin und Frau Hustedt für die Mercator-Stiftung, die dort den Bereich digitalisierte Gesellschaft leitet. Und ich freue und bedanke mich, dass wir erneut Gäste hier im Allianzforum sein können. Auch das ist inzwischen eine schöne und bewährte Tradition geworden. Dass wir diese Veranstaltung nun schon seit mehr als einem Jahrzehnt ohne jede Unterbrechung in einem auch unveränderten Format jeweils mit amtierenden Präsidenten europäischer Institutionen durchführen, ist nicht nur längst eine fest etablierte Übung geworden, es hat auch bei ruhiger und nüchterner Betrachtung nicht an Dringlichkeit verloren, denn das, was damals zur ersten Durchführung dieser Veranstaltung und anschließend eben zur Serie von Veranstaltungen Anlass gegeben hat, nämlich an einem besonderen Tag im Kalender der deutschen und europäischen Geschichte darüber nachzudenken, in welcher Verfassung befindet sich eigentlich Deutschland und Europa, mit welchen Herausforderungen haben wir zu tun, auf welche Veränderungen müssen wir uns einstellen. Das hat ja erkennbar auch im letzten Jahr oder seit dem letzten Jahr nicht an Dringlichkeit verloren. Und im Übrigen die Zusammensetzung dieser jährlichen Runde spricht ja auch für die gemeinsame Wahrnehmung, mindestens der Zweckmäßigkeit, wenn nicht der Dringlichkeit einer solchen gemeinsamen Beschäftigung. Ich begrüße ganz besonders herzlich die Vertreter der jungen Generation heute Abend und ich freue mich, dass einige von Ihnen ja nachher nach der Rede des Ratspräsidenten ihre eigenen Überlegungen und Einschätzungen, vielleicht auch Besorgnisse oder Empfehlungen dazu vortragen werden. Und stellvertretend für alle aktiven und ehemaligen Mitglieder von Parlamenten, Regierungen, Behörden, Botschaften begrüße ich den früheren Präsidenten des Europäischen Parlaments, Hans-Gert Pöttering. Schön, dass du auch heute Abend wieder dabei bist. Meine Damen und Herren, die Europäische Union vereint eine beachtliche wirtschaftliche Macht. Unsere liberalen demokratischen Gesellschaften haben auch unverändert eine bemerkenswerte Strahlkraft weit über die Grenzen der Mitgliedstaaten hinaus. Herman van Rompuy, der damalige Präsident des Rates der Europäischen Gemeinschaft und erste Redner am 9. November 2010, hat damals in seiner Rede erklärt, Zitat, die europäische Idee ist das erfolgreichste und freizügigste Projekt in der Welt seit 1945. Das ist vermutlich nicht übertrieben. Aber richtig ist auch, dass unser gesellschaftliches, politisches und wirtschaftliches Modell längst Konkurrenz bekommen hat, die wir ernst nehmen müssen und mit der wir uns auseinandersetzen müssen. Angesichts tiefgreifender alter und neuer, zunehmend globaler Herausforderungen muss die Europäische Union ihre Gestaltungsfähigkeit nach außen und zugleich ihren Nutzen nach innen immer wieder aufs Neue beweisen. Manuel Barroso, der damalige Kommissionspräsident, hat 2011 in seiner Rede auch hier von gleicher Stelle gesagt, Zitat, wir sind Zeugen einer fundamentalen Veränderung der wirtschaftlichen und geopolitischen Weltordnung. Ich bin der festen Überzeugung, dass Europa entweder jetzt gemeinsam voranschreiten muss oder sich der Gefahr einer Zersplitterung aussetzt. Wenn Europa sich nicht verändert, wird es scheitern. Wir stehen an einem Scheideweg. Entweder wir stehen zusammen oder wir versinken in Bedeutungslosigkeit. Ende des Zitats. Das ist jetzt 10 Jahre her. Und auch hier, glaube ich, lässt sich nicht übersehen, dass sich an der Richtigkeit und Dringlichkeit dieses Befundes nichts geändert hat. Unfreundlicher formuliert, die Notwendigkeit, auf Herausforderungen zu reagieren, kennen wir schon seit geraumer Zeit. Die Bereitschaft, das in überzeugender Weise zu tun, ist in den vergangenen Jahren jedenfalls nicht in gleicher Weise gewachsen. Auch deshalb ist es gut und wichtig, dass wir uns auch an diesem 9. November einmal mehr mit der aktuellen Lage und den sich daraus ergebenden Zukunftsperspektiven beschäftigen. Ich begrüße Sie, lieber Charles Michel, ganz besonders herzlich. Wir freuen uns, dass Sie wie Ihre Vorgänger Herman van Rompuy und Donald Tusk unserer Einladung gefolgt sind und heute Abend in der Europarede Ihre Einschätzung der Lage und Ihre Perspektiven für die überschaubare Zukunft vortragen werden. Seien Sie alle herzlich willkommen.
Dear President Lammert, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you for your warm welcome. I am deeply touched to speak to you here in Berlin on such an important date, the 9th of November. As a fervent European, there is probably no better date, no place to talk about the future of Europe, because it links, by chance of the calendar, 2 events that were the seeds of the most atrocious tragedy of our continent, and a few decades later, the symbolic event that marked the beginning of our unification. The Europe of 27 is the product of a unique reconciliation after a unique tragedy, and Berlin on the 9th of November is its symbolic capital. But Europe is not just about symbols. Europe is the result of decades of hard work by many. They were not intimidated by the distance between their starting point and their almost utopian ideal. And Konrad-Adenauer was one of them. Discussing the future of Europe under his watchful eye calls for high standards and modesty. And I thank you for giving me this prestigious opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the 21st century will be the century of Europe. This may sound presumptuous, I know. Europe, like the rest of the world, faces enormous challenges. Climate change, saving the planet and humanity from natural disaster. This will require a radical transformation of our development paradigm. The digital revolution and managing the boom of artificial intelligence. And, in addition, COVID-19, a long-predicted pandemic for which we were not prepared. And finally, we face growing pressure of authoritarian regimes. They provoke new tensions, They undermine our democracies. Science and facts are increasingly questioned. But we are not unique. Every generation faces a unique set of seemingly insurmountable challenges. But I think it's not an exaggeration to say that today's challenges are the most complex since the aftermath of the last World War. And we all feel our collective historic responsibility. And I am personally convinced that the EU has the strength, we have the strength to tackle these complex challenges. Of course, in Europe, we often hear pessimistic or even defeatist accounts of Europe, that we are too weak, too helpless to face the dangers of these uncertain times. And some parties even use people's anxieties as the springboard for their own ambitions. I have a different experience. When I meet leaders, NGO activists, or people around the world, they almost always speak with admiration about our European Union. I recently took part in the summit of Latin American and Caribbean countries in Mexico. And when speaking with leaders there, I felt the strong, even magnetic attraction that the European Union holds for them. So what exactly do they see in us? They see a great power. They see the largest area of democracy and freedom in the world, the most advanced area of prosperity and social development. They see a unique example of continental integration, peaceful and voluntary, peaceful and voluntary. And this admiration is not an abstract projection. It can be explained by concrete successes. Our single currency, the euro, has become the second most traded currency in the world. Our area of free movement offers benefits that we fully appreciated when the pandemic limited them. And our successes have direct impact on the rest of the world. For the better, the EU, for example, has led the fight against global warming for years, and notably in 2019, when we were the first to commit to climate neutrality by 2050, and then others have followed. When COVID-19 struck, despite some initial hesitations, we reacted quickly and decisively, and, more important, with solidarity. We agreed on the most ambitious investment and recovery package ever decided by the EU. And this, I can tell you, from very different starting points. And here, I'd like to pay tribute to Germany. You have played a leading role in moving the lines on common European investments and financing a recovery that benefits our entire European single market. On vaccines, the EU was at the forefront of global fundraising, and we grounded our strategy in solidarity. Right from the start, we decided to jointly purchase vaccines for all 27 member states, and this ensured their fair distribution across our union. Back in March, on the topic of vaccines, we knew the EU was not running a sprint, but a marathon. And indeed, the EU has become the world's largest producer and exporter of COVID vaccines. And when it comes to global vaccine solidarity, the EU is at the head of the pack. We helped launch the COVAX facility for the equitable distribution of vaccines across the world. We are its first sponsor. We have also launched programs to develop mRNA vaccine production capacity in Africa, and we are prepared to do this elsewhere. Ladies and gentlemen, the EU has done all this despite having almost no competence in health in the EU treaties. We did it because the 27 member states wanted us to, and we did it without organizing a convention or changing the treaties. And these successes and the image we project across the world reinforce my deep conviction that our unique European model will allow us to tackle this century's greatest challenges head-on. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe Europe is destined to become the great power of peace for this 21st century, a positive, unifying power. We can fulfill this destiny if we achieve the two conditions perfectly summarized by someone dear to you and very dear to me, Angela Merkel. When she received the Charles V Prize recently in Madrid, she said, and I quote her, "Europe can only be as strong as it is united, and it can only be as united as it is bound together by common values, united internally and strong externally." Unity and strength. Unity and strength, along with our strategic autonomy, are the keys to the future of Europe. First, unity. Where else knows better than Germany that unity, unification, makes you stronger? But as you know, unity does not appear from the heavens. It takes work. It must be built step by step, day by day. It requires political courage. And for unity to work, in a union of 27, it takes two key ingredients: mutual understanding and trust. Our countries, our regions have diverse histories, languages, traditions, political, economic backgrounds. And it's precisely this diversity that makes Europe extraordinarily rich, but it also makes our quest for unity particularly challenging. So we must strive to understand each other and respect our differences. And this means recognizing the equal legitimacy of each part of our union. There should be no talk of small or large member states, center of periphery, old and new. Nor should we speak of nations that have understood the European spirit better than others, because this poisons our unity and risks of condescension. And no place knows this better than this city, Berlin, where the physical fall of the wall led to the slow dismantling of mental walls. Yet elsewhere, we sometimes hear words that make some EU countries feel like victims of double standards. And this cannot happen. There is no place for double standards in one union. For unity to survive and flourish, it needs a solid foundation, our common values: human dignity, freedom, solidarity, tolerance, respect for diversity. It requires also trust, which grows and takes shape in a set of commonly chosen and accepted rules, and patience. Dear friends, unity is not chiseled in stone once and for all. It's a process. It's a collective journey. You start with different interests and different points of views. You discuss. You listen actively. You work to bring them closer together. You identify common interests. You compromise for the common good, the good of all. I often see the headlines before the European Council meetings in Brussels. They denounce the divisions as if different opinions and different national interests were a betrayal of our union. I don't see it like that. Democratic debates means coming together, looking each other in the eye, sometimes debating vigorously and deciding together. This is how democracy works. Ladies and gentlemen, unity also requires ownership. In authoritarian systems, this is very easy. Ownership is imposed. In democratic systems, it's more difficult. It's debated and then acquired. This leads to democratic legitimacy. In Brussels, sometimes you will hear the line, the European Union would be an absolutely amazing invention. Unfortunately, it's full of member states. This implies that member states are somehow selfish, an obstacle to achieving our European ideal. In my opinion, nothing could be further from the truth, because the EU is based on a double legitimacy. On the one hand, the legitimacy of the member states, where parliaments are elected and appoint governments. They represent their countries in the Council. And on the other hand, the legitimacy of the directly elected European Parliament, the designation of the European Commission, reflects perfectly this double democratic legitimacy. And EU action is only possible when it is based on these two democratic pillars. And one is not more legitimately European than the other. The legitimacy is also guaranteed by the rule of law. The rule of law means the separation of powers, the mutual independence of these powers, and in particular, the independence of the judiciary, which is an essential condition for confidence in the system. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the other key to Europe's future is, I think, our strategic autonomy. I know this term is understood differently in different places and with different sensibilities. But what matters most is not the word, is not the term, but the meaning behind it, our common European goals. In my view, strategic autonomy means no more and no less than being master of our own European destiny, the ability to act together in an open world. It means managing our interdependencies while avoiding excessive dependencies. To reinforce our strategic autonomy, we must strengthen our prosperity, our single market, and we must bolster our security. First, the prosperity. The prosperity is anchored in a competitive market of 450 million inhabitants and consumers, offering infinite scope for freedom of creation, innovation, enterprise, exchanges. And we still need to perfect its framework, to complete the banking union, and to achieve a true capital markets union to better channel money to the real economy. We will soon have to discuss, it will be a difficult debate, if our Stability and Growth Pact that has served us well for 24 years needs to be updated. Ludwig Erhard always reminded Germany that the focal point of our economy is the individual. Our European vision is one of shared prosperity, where all citizens enjoy the same opportunities and the same range of products and services. And this is the meaning of our cohesion policies and of our recovery program, Next Generation EU, which aim to reduce the gaps between countries and regions. The more our economies converge, the stronger they will be for each other. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, the EU has a clear and robust strategy to face the challenges of this 21st century. A strategy underpinned by our twin transitions of climate and digital. They are enshrined in our Green Deal and in our digital agenda. And this transition implies a massive transformation of our economic and social paradigm. Today's climate emergency leaves us no choice, and we know that we must pursue a totally new development model, one that no longer abuses natural resources, but reuses them in a circular economy detached from fossil fuels. And this transition will require profound changes in behavior, but it offers extraordinary potential to innovate and to create new technologies and services that will drive our prosperity in the future. The digital revolution will also play a pivotal role, and maximizing the vast potential of data and artificial intelligence will be decisive to our future success. We feel that this future sparks excitement in some and anxiety in others. Many people wonder what will become of their jobs or worry about their children's prospects, and this uncertainty is totally understandable. 10 or 20 years from now, some of you will be working in jobs that don't yet exist today, and it is hard to imagine. So we must be forward-looking and provide the right training for these new professions, because we will crucially need skilled workers, and because we want everyone to be part of this exciting future. Ladies and gentlemen, prosperity comes from internal market, but it also comes from external trade, because trade drives development, and trade is a powerful lever to influence the world. The EU is the world's leading trading power, but I will tell you a secret. We have a problem. We are very good at striking ambitious free trade or investment agreements with foreign partners, with the European Commission in charge. But for some time now, we have difficulty ratifying these agreements once they are signed, and we can only implement them provisionally at best. The problem is one of form and one of substance. On the form, the confidentiality of these negotiations makes it increasingly difficult to explain their value to the public and to the national parliaments that must approve them. In other words, ownership does not work anymore. And I think that we should take inspiration from the more transparent and inclusive method taken in the Brexit negotiations. As for the substance, we need to clarify the goals and priorities of these agreements. And we started this discussion among leaders at our last European Council meeting a few weeks ago. Do we believe those agreements should facilitate trade and investment within a framework of reciprocity and level playing field, while also contributing to a fairer, more sustainable world? Or do we think an agreement is only valid and acceptable if it solves all the world's problems in one go? I'll give you one example. The Commission negotiated a comprehensive agreement on investment with China. This agreement would open access to major sectors from which our European companies are currently barred. It would create more reciprocity and address labor laws and conditions. Is this agreement perfect? No. Did we get everything we wanted? Certainly not, but neither did China. Would this agreement lead to a democratic system in China and full respect for human and labor rights? No. But it creates a platform to discuss these issues with the Chinese authorities who don't like them because they do not share our same system and our values. And the question is, are our interests better defended and our ability to protect the Uyghurs' rights and to promote the rule of law in Hong Kong better ensured with or without such an agreement? This is not an exact science. There is no easy answer, but we need to agree at the level of the member states and the EU institutions on the priorities we pursue with these trade and investment agreements. And in any case, I agree with my good friend Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, when he says Europe must be a player and not just a playing field. I will make sure the European Council addresses this important debate. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the second pillar of our strategic autonomy is, of course, security. And it begins with our soft geopolitical influence aimed at promoting our fundamental values and defending our interests. And here, I believe we have a powerful advantage. And I will tell you another secret. The world wants to engage with us because our partners see the benefit of engaging with a positive force free from the colonial prism of the past centuries. And we are building new alliances with Africa, with Asia, with Latin America, with partners who are confident about our vision and about our values. And these alliances are about interconnecting our physical and digital infrastructure and about connecting our people by stimulating public and private investment within a framework of rules and standards that put fundamental values at the heart of our project. This is what we call trusted connectivity. And we want to develop this trusted connectivity with like-minded partners. Moreover, global issues can only be addressed through global cooperation. And the best way to exert influence is to be present diplomatically, to engage diplomatically. Ensuring our security means knowing and better understanding our neighbors, our competitors, even our adversaries, and making ourselves better understood by them. That's what I try to do, for instance, in my phone calls with the Russian president. It gives me the knowledge to share with my colleagues in the European Council or with other international partners, like the Ukrainian president. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, diplomacy also means taking advantage of opportunities. When I visited Georgia last spring, a strategically important country in the framework of our Eastern Partnership, I saw the opportunity to broker a political deal between the conflicted parties. And similarly, after my contacts with the Armenian and Azeri leaders, the EU managed to broker a post-conflict deal between these countries, which were in war a few months ago. I am convinced the EU has a role to play, has an important role to play. Allow me now to take aim at an overused cliché, which says that without our own defense, the EU lacks the instruments to assume our role as a global power. In fact, we have many instruments, often unsuspected, to influence external actors. We could be much stronger and more efficient by being more pragmatic and more coherent. And there are many examples of pragmatic European responses to crisis situations. But we need to be more coherent. EU policies, trade, development, competition, neighborhood, climate action are often managed in silos, independent of each other. And it's precisely what the European Council does, linking different policies, trying to ensure coherence, requesting, for example, the Commission to organize on the external dimension of migration. We strive for a mutually beneficial cooperation with third countries. We have a lot to offer them. And this topic, migration, brings me to a current crisis. We are facing a brutal hybrid attack on our EU borders. Belarus is weaponizing migrants' distress in a cynical and shocking way. At our last European Council, we condemned and decided to respond to these attacks, and we asked the Commission to propose all necessary measures in line with EU law and international obligations. We have opened the debate on the EU financing of physical border infrastructure, and this must be settled rapidly, because Polish and Baltic borders are EU borders, one for all and all for one. Ladies and gentlemen, security, of course, also means defense. European defense is anchored in our Atlantic alliance, and NATO is the backbone of our collective security. And beyond the military, this alliance links us to our strategic partners on the other side of the Atlantic, because we know that we share common history, we share common values, common commitments. And this alliance of democracies is all the more essential at a time of increasing pressure as we face new kinds of attack from authoritarian regimes. And this is why we must develop our defense capabilities, because stronger allies make stronger alliances. And we welcome the United States recognition of the value of a stronger European defense as a complement to NATO, because we cannot ignore the long-term developments even among our allies. And recent geopolitical events in Afghanistan and in the Pacific have shown that we must rely more on ourselves, take greater responsibility for ourselves, because overdependence, even on our best friends, is not sustainable, is not healthy. In concrete terms, the European Council has agreed on a work plan for the near future. In December, we will discuss the strategic compass being prepared by Josep Borrell, and this compass will set out our strategic axis. We will endorse it at the Defense Summit in March next year. Ladies and gentlemen, we are often asked the question, will Europe one day have its own European army? The prospect exists, but in any case, we all know it wouldn't be for tomorrow. And today, more than a European army, we need European capabilities. Yet I do believe we must act in a concrete and operational way to develop our capabilities in the face of new risks and new areas. Cyber and space. Digital development is making our economies and our societies more efficient, but also more dependent on technology, databases, or connectivity. And one thing is certain, we will one day have to face a major cyber crisis or cyber attack. And the only question is when. And recent attacks have shown that the threats are global, and so are the attackers. It's therefore the interest of Europeans to pool our efforts and create defensive and deterrent cyber capabilities. And this, in my opinion, should start by establishing an EU system for cyber crisis management and response to large-scale attacks. Our upcoming discussion on our strategic compass will be a good opportunity to consider this project. Our cybersecurity is also intrinsically linked to the security of our resources in space. And we are more and more familiar with geolocation, observation, and surveillance tools on land and sea. But space is increasingly hosting infrastructure and services that provide connectivity functions essential to digital development. The congestion of this territory, not to mention the activities of malicious actors, mean that we must also protect our interests there. And so we must strengthen the synergies between the civil, space, and defense industries. Last April, we adopted the new European Union space program with a record budget of 13 billion euro. And we will make a difference by pooling our efforts from the outset. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, Konrad-Adenauer, who else, famously said, we should not forget that to achieve great things, we need patience. And I would add this, some victories come after a long time, while others can be reached swiftly. The European project takes time. 70 years is still a young age for such a unique organization like ours. And we have already achieved a lot. And our experience shows that sometimes we can gain time by taking our time. And in other moments, it's good to be pragmatic and speed up. I have no doubt the EU is on the right track to become the great power of peace of the 21st century, the century of Europe, for the benefit of our people and for a better, fairer, and more sustainable world. We must be wise, know when to be patient, and when to seize the moment to take decisive action. We will stick to our values and to our ideals. We will grow in power by being pragmatic, by being realistic, and by being ambitious. Thank you.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, mein Name ist Carla Husted. Ich leite den Bereich Digitalisierte Gesellschaft bei der Stiftung Mercator und ich freue mich, Sie heute im Namen der Stiftung, im Namen meiner Kolleginnen und Kollegen hier begrüßen zu dürfen. Es ist eine große Ehre, an diesem besonderen Tag, an diesem besonderen Ort heute hier sein zu können. Und wir, die Stiftung Mercator, freuen uns, die Europarede jährlich unterstützen zu können. Sehr geehrter Präsident Michel, ganz herzlichen Dank für Ihre eindrucksvolle Rede, die gezeigt hat, dass wir trotz der vielen Herausforderungen, die uns gerade begegnen, auch sehr viel haben, was uns zuversichtlich stimmen kann. Und die gezeigt hat, dass wir gerade in dieser herausfordernden Zeit vor allem zwei Dinge brauchen: europäischen Zusammenhalt und ein großes Vertrauen in die EU. Meine Vorredner haben auch sehr deutlich gemacht, dass der 9. November ein Tag ist, der zum einen für Mut steht und für Hoffnung, der uns aber auch in Erinnerung ruft, die dunkle Seite von dessen, wozu wir Menschen eigentlich fähig sind. Es ist ein Tag der Ambiguität. Und es wird Sie nicht überraschen, dass ich diese Gelegenheit auch nutzen möchte, ein Schlaglicht zu werfen auf ein Thema, was mich im Kontext der europäischen Zukunft besonders bewegt, die Digitalisierung. Denn auch die Digitalisierung ist ein Thema, welches geprägt ist von Ambiguität, ein Thema, wo Licht und Schatten häufig sehr nah beieinander liegen. In der Corona-Pandemie konnten wir alle sehr dankbar sein über die digitalen Hilfsmittel, die uns heutzutage zur Verfügung stehen. Sie haben Nähe und Austausch ermöglicht in Zeiten, wo räumliche Beschränkungen im Fokus standen. Sie stehen damit auch für Freiheit. Aber zugleich wurde auch in der Corona-Pandemie gerade deutlich, dass die algorithmischen Systeme hinter sozialen Netzwerken mit dazu beitragen, dass Desinformationen sich schneller denn je verbreiten und dass gerade die Stimmen laut werden von Personen, die extreme Positionen, die Hass und Gewalt verbreiten wollen. In was für einer Welt wir zukünftig leben werden, welche Werte unser Zusammenleben bestimmen, wie unsere Demokratie ausgestaltet sein wird, das hängt maßgeblich davon ab, wie die Europäische Union die aktuellen Herausforderungen meistern wird. Die großen Zukunftsfragen unserer Zeit, sei es die Bewältigung der Klimakrise oder den Umgang mit dem digitalen Wandel, sind globale Fragen, die sich nicht durch nationale Alleingänge lösen lassen. Die EU hat sich dem Ziel einer menschenzentrierten Digitalisierung verschrieben. Das ist ein erster wichtiger Schritt. Was das jedoch genau bedeutet und wie wir mit neuen und alten Wertekonflikten umgehen wollen, wie dem zwischen Freiheit und Sicherheit, wo rote Linien für Technologieeinsatz gezogen werden müssen, diese Fragen müssen ähnlich wie auch bei der Diskussion zum Klimawandel in einer breiten gesellschaftlichen Debatte und unter Einbezug möglichst diverser Perspektiven geführt werden. In der Stiftung Mercator sind wir der Überzeugung, dass hierbei insbesondere der jüngeren Generation an Europäerinnen und Europäern eine wichtige Rolle zukommt. Gerade deshalb ist es besonders wichtig, jungen Menschen ein Gehör zu verschaffen und sie darin zu ermutigen, sich mit ihren Stimmen in die Debatte über die Zukunft Europas einzubringen. Eines der Ziele der Stiftung Mercator ist es, das europapolitische Engagement junger Menschen zu unterstützen. Dies drückt sich nicht zuletzt in der Förderung des Projektes Wir sind Europa aus. Dieses Kooperationsprojekt der Stiftung Zukunft Berlin, der Humboldt-Universität Berlin und der internationalen Journalistenprogramme ermöglicht es jungen Menschen, Journalistinnen und Journalisten und Akteuren aus der Zivilgesellschaft mit politischen EntscheidungsträgerInnen zu diskutieren und die Zukunft Europas aktiv mitzugestalten. Die Europarede ist immer wieder ein hervorragender Anlass, damit genau diese Arten von Diskussionen entstehen können. Ich habe selbst kürzlich die Ehre gehabt, den Altersdurchschnitt des Managementteams der Stiftung Mercator etwas abzusenken. Und ich weiß aus eigener Erfahrung, wie gewinnbringend die generationsübergreifende Zusammenarbeit sein kann. Sie begegnet mir in meiner alltäglichen Arbeit und sie macht einen großen Teil unseres Erfolges aus. Und zugleich sehe ich auch, dass sie nicht von alleine kommt, sondern dass sie genau wie der interdisziplinäre Austausch, wie der Austausch über Ländergrenzen hinweg verschiedene Dinge verlangt. Ein offenes Ohr, ein Verständnis für unterschiedliche Sprachen, Wertschätzung und vor allem Neugierde auf andere Perspektiven. Ich freue mich, dass dieser Form des offenen und wertschätzenden Austauschs heute ein Forum gegeben wird und möchte nochmal meinen herzlichen Dank aussprechen. An die Stiftung Zukunft Berlin, an die Humboldt-Universität, an die Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, an die internationalen Journalistenprogramme und an alle ihre Mitarbeiterinnen und Mitarbeiter, dank denen wir die heutige Veranstaltung gemeinsam ermöglichen können. Mein Dank gilt ganz insbesondere auch den heutigen Referentinnen und dem Präsidenten des Europäischen Rates, Charles Michel. Ich wünsche allen den Gästen hier vor Ort und auch den digital zugeschalteten Zuhörerinnen und Zuhörern eine spannende und anregende Diskussion und übergebe jetzt das Wort an Frau Rother für die Debatte. Vielen Dank.
Thank you so much, Carla Husted, for these inspiring words. Dear Charles Michel, President of the European Council, dear Professor Dr. Norbert Lammert, dear Volker Hassemer, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yolanda Rother. I lead the Europe activities at Stiftung Zukunft Berlin, and it is a pleasure for me to host a conversation here now with representatives of the European generation that will be impacted and affected by the words that we heard here today and the decisions that are made longer than anyone else. I invite you on stage and would start with you, Mr. Michel. Please join me on stage, along with Lukas Hochscheid, Rina Haidari, Anja Supronenko, and Peter Techet. Thank you. Lukas Hochscheid, you are the president of the Berlin grassroots think tank Polis 180. I would like to hear your reaction to the speech that we had heard from Mr. Charles Michel first.
Thank you, Yolanda, and let me thank you, Mr. President, for your very insightful, very compelling speech. I would like to come back to the point that you mentioned extensively, which is strategic autonomy in the European foreign affairs. I think it is of great importance to stress this point because strategic autonomy is not only a timely debate, it is also a vague concept, as you said yourself, and I agree with that. I believe that we have to articulate it more clearly because if we want this debate to include every one of us, then we have to make it very clear. And we have to have a shared common understanding. And I would wish for a more concise debate on this very term because I believe it's crucial. The other point that was striking me was what you said about the silos in which European foreign policy is often thought of. And I agree again that these silos have to be broken up. However, I wonder how we can come to a common understanding of how integrated, how inclusive foreign policies have to be thought. In my own work, I engage with young perspectives on foreign policy, which tend to be different from the mainstream discourse, which is very often centered around security and defense, trade maybe, and which includes more perspectives than that, which includes more than economic and security interests. There is the intersectional perspective in foreign policy, which is a feminist foreign policy for many young people. There is climate diplomacy as a new field in foreign affairs, which is emerging, and which I believe is also crucial for our discourse that we're having. So I would like to ask you maybe to come back on how we can integrate, how we can include more broader perspectives, social perspectives, climate perspectives, and also the more political perspectives which concern minority rights, which concern feminist perspectives into the European foreign policy discourse. Thank you.
No, thank you. First, strategic autonomy. I know that this word, strategic autonomy, is discussed in many European member states, probably because autonomy or sovereignty, it has not necessarily the same meaning everywhere in Europe. I know that very well, but I don't think that we need a big battle on the word. I think that we need to be clear on the substance, on the common goals. And in a nutshell, what it means, in my opinion, is this idea that we need to have more influence in the world. This is what we are doing with climate change, for example. I remember very well 2 years ago in December, it was in December, when the European Council took this decision to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. I remember that in many countries, in many circles, there were doubts about this ambitious goal. And what did we observe? The following weeks, the following months, many other countries in the world took step in the same direction. It's one very concrete example of what you said, climate diplomacy. In my opinion, strategic autonomy, this is more than security and defense. It's more. The first pillar is maybe prosperity. And here we must also play a leading role. And that's why I think that the fact that we are aware in Europe, especially the young generation, because the young generation played a very important role in order to convince the political leaders to move on this important topic of climate change, is paramount. And what's the reality, in fact? The latest decades, we have built our prosperity in our countries in Europe by abusing the natural resources. And now we understand this is not possible anymore. And what was in the past a waste is a product, is a resource. This is the basis for the circular economy. And I think you spoke about the digital agenda. There is a link, there's a parallelism with the digital agenda. It's important not to abuse the new resources of tomorrow on which we will base our prosperity by making sure that we respect privacy, fundamental freedoms. And you are right, this is the space for an exciting democratic and political debate. And who else? Europe will play a leading role here also. This is my strong personal conviction. Foreign affairs. I'm very humble and very modest, but after 2 years in this capacity, I think a first important step, without necessarily changing immediately all the treaties, would be to strengthen the constant dialogue among the member states, to make sure that we have the same level of understanding, the same level of intelligence, the same level of information. And that's why we try, at the level of the European Council, to have more and more debates which are strategic on the external affairs. What about Russia? What about China? What about the Eastern Mediterranean? What about Africa? One example, we'll have an important summit next year with Africa. We have started a few months ago to prepare the substance of what we want to achieve with this renewal of this alliance with Africa. This one example, there are many other examples. Tomorrow I will travel tonight I will travel to Poland in order also to make sure that we will try to have a common position, a common reaction when we face such hybrid attacks against the EU borders and against the European Union.
Yeah, thank you for this. Anya Supernenko, I would like to hear from you perhaps what it is that you found stood out in the speech, perhaps even what may have been missing in the speech. Just briefly to introduce you, you lead the European Youth Parliament for the past 2 years. The European Youth Parliament works under the umbrella of the Schwarzkopf Foundation. And Anya, you are a Future of Europe Scholar of the Hertie School of Governance. Anya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you, Mr. President, for your opening remarks. A number of issues you've mentioned remind me of what we prioritize in our work in the European Youth Parliament. And of course, the issues like climate change, migration, digitalization, that's what young people care about. And what we care about in European Youth Parliament is to really engage with them and to give them the voice. We work with young people from Ireland to Portugal, France to Azerbaijan, and we really want for them also Europe not to mean just the European Union. And what we see, and I agree also with what you've said, is that it's far from peaceful, the continent we have now, and that's why we still see that the opportunities are also not equal for young people within the EU and outside of the EU. We bring young people from Azerbaijan and Armenia, Turkey and Cyprus, Russia and Ukraine in one room to build the dialogue, to talk to each other, to engage, and to try to understand each other, and to talk about all of these issues. And that's what I'm curious also to hear from you a little bit more on how do you see young people's role in all of the debates you've mentioned. Ursula von der Leyen did announce that next year is the year of the European youth. So it would be very enlightening to hear what exactly does this year mean, where the youth engagement comes, and how can we engage young people in the dialogue of the future of Europe, because we strongly believe that everything starts with young people and with talking to them and with them and about them. So, Mr. President, if you have any reactions.
No, I totally agree that everything starts with young people, and climate change is a very beautiful and interesting example, because I'm convinced that without the political engagement of the young generations in Europe, I'm not certain we would have been able to take such an important and fundamental decision for our own future. And that's why, indeed, I think that we must trust the young generation, because you will decide what will be the world tomorrow in Europe and outside of Europe. And that's why I think that it's paramount to give the chance to open the doors in order to make sure that you have the possibility to defend your ideas, to propose new ideas. And even if sometimes new ideas could seem very strange, maybe a few months later, a few years later, it's a new normal, it's a mainstream. And I think that the young generation has a fundamental role to play in order to make sure that this unique political project, because this is a unique political project, we have learned the lessons of the past, and we have decided to build a political space based on peace, stability, mutual understanding. And this will be your responsibility to make sure that this project will be also a great project in the future.
Thank you so much for expanding on this. I would now invite Rina Haderi to join the conversation. Rina, you are born in Kosovo, raised in the Czech Republic, and have studied in Germany. And now you work at the European Parliament in the office of a German MEP in the Green Group. You're also a graduate of the Hertie School of Governance, and it would be very interesting to hear your take on the words that have been said so far.
Thank you, Yolanda, and thank you so much for your speech, Mr. President. As Yolanda mentioned, I come from Kosovo, and I have a passion for learning more about enlargement and Western Balkans, not only because I come from there. I think it's a very interesting region. And in your speech, you mentioned freedom, you mentioned peace and security, and there are two things that I would like to ask you about. Just to say, the EU is a key principal economic player in the Western Balkans, but I was wondering, what about the Western Balkans and the EU? Currently, there's a crisis in Bosnia, as you might know. The Serbian leader, Milorad Dodik, is threatening to create its own Serbian army, which was the case in the 1990s, and history is repeating itself in a way. And I was wondering, what is the European Council doing on that? Are there any priorities? And the second one is, to this day, the citizens of Kosovo are the only ones who do not enjoy visa-free travel in the continent. So it's a very bureaucratic, tiresome, costly thing that we have to go through. And there are many reasons why it hasn't happened. It has been it should have been a technical issue, but now it has become a political issue. And we know that 5 member states do not recognize Kosovo, and I think it has to do with terms of international law. But as was mentioned by my colleagues here, what about the youth? The youth is struggling through a lot. They don't have the exposure, they don't have the chance to, be maybe on a panel like this or study abroad. I had the privilege and I was lucky enough, but I went through the same process. So I was wondering, for these two things, what are your thoughts and priorities on this?
You know that there are different opinions among the member states about this enlargement process, but I would like to share with you some thoughts. First, I think that we need to encourage all the efforts in order to solve the conflicts in this region, because this is our own interest, to have more stability, more security in the region. And I think that if we encourage more economic development, more economic investments, and more regional cooperation in the region, it can be useful, it can be helpful. And it's what we are trying to do. You know that we have announced, the Commission has announced a huge financial package in order to make sure that it will be possible to invest in infrastructure and to support more connectivity in this region, point one. Point two, I think that we must strengthen the ties with the EU without waiting for the formal decision regarding this accession process. For example, giving the possibility to the young generation to participate in all the European programs. For example, in order to make sure that when we'll have the conference on the future of Europe, we'll also listen to the dreams of the young generation coming from those countries. And third point, I will share with you one personal thought after having had many meetings with political actors, with leaders in all those countries. I think that all the conflicts in the region, they have one point in common. This is the question of the rights of the minorities in the different countries. And I think we should encourage the leaders in those countries to have as much as possible a similar approach when it comes to the minority rights in those countries. And the EU, we have this DNA, the fundamental right, the fundamental principle. We should encourage them. And there is another responsibility that we have. I think if we want to facilitate more progress and more ties with those countries, that we will also need to think about the way we decide today at the European level. Because you know that for some member states, they are a little bit nervous with this possible enlargement because they have the impression if we would take one additional step without first having reformed the way we decide, maybe we will make more difficult in the future our ability to act and to take decisions. It means that we have responsibility, the 27 member states, and we need to encourage the political actors in this region to solve, to reduce the level of those conflicts and to solve those conflicts. And I think that what we are trying to do, for example, when we had this Western Balkan summit in Slovenia a few weeks ago, this is needed, this is useful, but this is not enough. And I'm convinced that in the next months, in the next years, we will maintain a very strong focus on this important region for us.
Thank you also for sharing these insights. Peter Techet, you are a member of Wir sind Europa. You research on the topics of East and South Europe, and you are active as a journalist. I would like to encourage you to ask a strict question about your thoughts on the State of the Europe speech that we have just heard to Mr. President Michel.
Thank you very much for your speech. So you really covered a lot of topics we are facing in Europe, but I would also join this question of the enlargement. So very concrete, what do you think about the enlargement? Do we need it because of our economical interest or because of sharing our values in these neighboring regions? And I'm asking it also not because of enlargement, but because we have countries now within the European Union which shouldn't or wouldn't be accepted now if they were outside the European Union. So I mean very concrete Poland and Hungary, where we have maybe similar tendencies like in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and I have the impression that the European Union is missing to react in an efficient way on these topics in Poland and Hungary. And that's why my question, do you think that the European Union is a community of values or only a community of economical interest? And if it is a community of values, it shouldn't be, of course, but if it's a community of values, how could and should the European Union help other actors in Poland and Hungary who are trying to defend European values even against their governments? I mean, even in financial ways, because now I have this impression that the European Union is communicating only with the governments and not with other local actors or NGOs or concrete with the citizens.
No, this is interesting for me to listen to your views because it's useful to understand what's the impression that's given by the European Council or by the EU institutions. First, about the Western Balkans, of course, it's much more than the question of economic development. It's a question of stability, of prosperity. It's also a question of values, of democratic values, not in order to please Brussels, but this is the first priority for them to choose which societies they want for their people in the future. And that's why we encourage in those countries many reforms, the fight against corruption, the independence of justice, and all those European priorities. And we know that other countries are not waiting for the EU. Other countries with other political systems, with other fundamental principles are trying to have more influence in this region. There are many reasons, I think, for us to be more committed, to be more engaged in order to strengthen the ties with those countries and with the people of those countries. This is one first point. I'm personally very convinced. This one first element. Now, the question of rule of law, of the fundamental values. Of course, this is a community of values. The birth of this European project is based on this idea that we want a rules-based order, a rules-based European order in order to guarantee stability, peace, and prosperity, no doubt. And 1 year ago, when we negotiated during 4 days and 4 nights. I will never forget, in Brussels, this recovery package and the next European budget, we decided, this is not a detail, to put in place a new tool, a new mechanism, which is called the conditionality, governance conditionality. We will respect what we have decided all together with the support of the 27 member states. We have decided that we will wait for the assessment by the European Court of Justice, and the Commission will have an additional tool in order to address when we think that we face some difficulties which are related to this important question of the rule of law, point 1. It means we have legal tools, we have institutional tools, and we need to use the tools we have if we think that we have a problem in one of the member states. Point 2, I think that the political dialogue is also needed, because what's important is to find a solution. This is what's important, is to make sure that the fundamental principles are respected everywhere in Europe. It's a question of confidence, mutual confidence in the European institutions, in the European system, in the European model. And that's why when I chaired a few weeks ago this European Council, and when we addressed this topic during the meeting, I've tried to make sure that we would listen to each other, that we would listen to the different arguments, because this is the basis of the European project. Even if we do not agree with the arguments proposed or explained by your counterpart, you must listen to this argument in order to see where is the possible decision, where is the possible compromise, by making sure that you respect the fundamental values, the fundamental principles, but at the same time that we try together to find a solution. And I sincerely hope that the dialogue with the authorities in the different countries, not only those countries, but that the dialogue will make possible for us to take steps in the right direction. And there is no doubt, fundamental values, fundamental principles, democratic principles, this is the DNA of this European project. This is what we promote outside of Europe. And of course, we need to be credible. We must be credible, and we must make sure that we do our best day after day in order to guarantee for all our citizens the respect of those fundamental principles.
Thank you. If you permit one last question. Over the last few days, we have been, in the context of the Berlin conference, speaking about the approach Europe bottom-up. I want to know, how is the European Council making this a priority, or even considering a Europe bottom-up approach?
I have the impression that this idea that I've tried to develop of the double legitimacy shows that the leaders in the European Council, they are accountable. Day after day, they must explain to their national parliaments, to their public opinion, what they are deciding at the European level. And I think also that this conference on the future of Europe could be, and I hope will be, a good opportunity in order to make sure that we listen to the expectation, that we understand very well what's the social contract that we want for the future, the 450 million citizens in Europe. What do we want? What are our common priorities? How do we want to decide together? This is, I think, the best way to guarantee this ownership. And I said it and I repeat it, ownership in a democratic regime is something that's difficult, because it means that we need to convince, we need to use arguments, we need to listen, we need to find a compromise, to decide together. Of course, in some other regimes, it can be easier, but in the long run, there is no doubt that this democratic model is the only way if we want to guarantee the fundamental freedoms, the prosperity, and a better future for all the citizens.
Thank you so much, President of the European Council, Charles Michel. Thank you so much to all the panelists, and I ask you for a round of applause.
Meine Damen und Herren, sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, herzlichen Dank noch einmal für Ihre ja sehr optimistische Rede. habe mich gewundert, dass keiner der Diskutanten gefragt hat, wo der Präsident seinen Optimismus wirklich hernimmt. Aber es ist schön, dass er ihn hat. Ich bedanke mich auch für die Rede, nicht nur, sondern auch dafür, dass Sie bereit waren, an dieser Diskussion teilzunehmen. Das hat nicht jeder unserer, Herr Pöttering weiß das, seitdem wir das Ganze hier gegründet haben, das wollte nicht jeder Präsident sich einlassen auf die Diskussion. Bei Ihnen hatte ich den Eindruck, das ist für Sie nicht eine Belastung, sondern eigentlich hätten Sie schon von Anfang an am liebsten mit einer solchen Diskussion beginnen wollen und mit den jüngeren Leuten das erläutern, was ihnen wichtig ist. Frau Rothe hat es gesagt, wir haben, das will ich dann doch noch einmal heute Abend erinnern, 3 Tage lang, beginnend in Chemnitz, der Kulturstadt Europas für Deutschland im Jahr 2025, gesprochen über Europe Bottom-up. Und das ist nicht nur verstanden als ein Europa, das von unten Ansprüche stellt, sondern ein Europa, das ihr Wort der Ownership ernst nimmt, dass nämlich die Eigentümer sich auch unmittelbar und selbst um ihr Eigentum kümmern müssen. Dass es eine unvermittelte Aufgabe der Eigentümer ist, sich mit den spezifischen Möglichkeiten, die gerade in den Städten und Regionen und an der sogenannten Basis existieren, die manchmal die Spitze gar nicht hat, mit diesen spezifischen Möglichkeiten Europa zu verbessern. Nicht nur Sie zu bitten, es besser zu machen, sondern sich selbst in der Pflicht zu sehen, die Verbesserung Europas zu leisten. Da bin ich noch einmal, Herr Präsident Tzitzikostas, Ihnen sehr herzlich dankbar. Denn wenn wir von Brüssel sprechen, ist es gar nicht so einfach zu wissen, wer in Brüssel sich denn dafür interessieren könnte. Und eigentlich sind Sie, Herr Tzitzikostas, mit Ihrem Ausschuss die Vertretung der Städte und Regionen und die Vertretung von uns allen in Europa. Aber die zu uns sprechen, und vor allem wenn Sie so sprechen wie Sie, Herr Präsident, die empfinden wir auch als unseren Partner. Wir nehmen Sie ernst. Wir schätzen Sie. Und das ist nicht nur eine gute, sondern auch eine belastende Nachricht. Denn wer ernst genommen wird, wird auch in die Pflicht genommen. Und sogar von uns, die wir nichts anderes als europäische Bürger sind. Damit will ich diesen Abend nicht mit einer Drohung beenden, sondern mit der Freude darüber, dass offensichtlich jemand wie Sie auch in der Lage ist, diese Forderung oder diesen Wunsch der gemeinsamen Arbeit zu erfüllen. Nicht nur, weil wir es wollen, sondern ich würde Ihnen wirklich glauben, weil Sie es selbst wollen. Diese Art von Gemeinsamkeit können wir jetzt bei unserem Empfang noch einmal miteinander erleben. Und ich will erinnern an das Wort, und darum bestätige ich das nochmal, wir sind Europa, unterstützt von Mercator. Was wir mit Wir sind Europa machen, das ist diese Idee, dass wir wissen, dass nicht nur Sie die Pflicht haben, für Europa zu arbeiten, sondern jeder von uns hat das auch mit seinen besonderen eigenen Mitteln. Und damit wir das können, werden wir uns jetzt gemeinsam stärken. Herzlichen Dank. Sie sind eingeladen, in die oberste Etage dieses Hauses mit uns zu kommen. Herzlichen Dank Ihnen noch einmal, Herr Präsident, und ich hoffe, irgendwie sehen wir uns wieder. Danke Ihnen sehr.